The hammer struck with sickening finality, driving the foreclosure auction sign deep into the parched earth of Farmer Tom's front lawn. Each blow echoed the despair in his heart. He stood, a figure etched in grief, dirt and tears streaking his weathered face, watching helplessly as a sleek black sedan, carrying a banker whose smug indifference was a fresh insult, pulled away from the dilapidated farmhouse he called home his entire life. The world seemed to crumble around him. But just out of sight, hidden behind the dusty, sun-bleached planks of the old barn, Tom's wife, Sarah, was clenching her cell phone, her knuckles white. A desperate, almost forgotten hope flickered in her determined eyes. She was making a call, a whisper into the vastness of the indifferent sky, a call to a ghost from her past, a call she prayed would unleash the miracle they so desperately needed. Willow Creek Farm wasn't merely a collection of fields and aging buildings to Tom and Sarah. It was the very soul of their existence, the silent keeper of generations of their family story. Tom, a man whose hands were as gnarled and resilient as the ancient oak trees that bordered their land, had been born in a master bedroom, the same room where he now lay awake most nights, the weight of impending loss a suffocating blanket. He'd learned to walk in these fields, to drive his first tractor here, to love the stubborn, demanding earth under the watchful eye of his father, who had inherited it from his own, the scent of his mother's baking, the shared laughter during harvest time, the quiet pride of belonging to this land. It was all woven into the fabric of his being. Sarah, who had grown up amidst the concrete and noise of the city, had found an unexpected home here. She'd fallen for Tom's quiet strength and steadfast heart first, and then, with a surprising ferocity, for the challenging beauty of farm life. She'd embraced the dawn-till-dusk rhythm, learning to coax life from the soil, to mend what was broken, to read the subtle language of the seasons. Her touch had softened the farmhouse's rugged edges, with cheerful curtains in the kitchen and a vibrant vegetable garden that, in better years, had overflowed with abundance. It was Sarah who often found a bit extra for neighbors in need, a warm pie for old Mrs. Gable down the road, or a patient ear for young Jenny, whose mother was ailing. This quiet kindness was as natural to her as breathing, an unconscious extension of her compassionate spirit. Even as their own skies grew darker, their life had always been a testament to hard work and resilience, a constant dance with nature's whims and the fluctuating fortunes of the market. But the previous few years had been relentlessly cruel. A suffocating drought had turned their once lush pastures into cracked, barren expanses. The creek that gave the farm its name, once a vibrant ribbon of life, had shrunk to a sorrowful, muddy trickle. The loans they had taken out, desperate measures to modernize equipment and simply stay afloat, had morphed into an insurmountable beast of debt, its interest rates creeping ever upward. Tom, with a heavy heart, had sold off a cherished parcel of woodland, then another strip of pasture. He'd swallowed his pride and taken on grueling evening shifts hauling grain for a larger, more prosperous farm miles away, the shame of it a constant burn. Sarah, her fingers nimble and quick, had taken in sewing and mending, working late into quiet hours by the flickering light of an oil lamp, the meager coin she earned feeling like tiny pebbles against an oncoming avalanche. Tom, a man who defined himself by his ability to provide, to wrestle a living from the earth, found their decline almost unbearable. He grew quieter, the laughter lines around his eyes deepening into furrows of worry. He would walk the perimeter of their land, his hand trailing along the weathered fence posts, his heart constricting with a premonition of loss so profound he couldn't voice it, not even to Sarah. He felt the eyes of the town on him, some curious, some pitying, and he retreated further into a shell of stoic despair. Sarah watched him, her own heart aching for his silent agony, for the growing chasm of unspoken fear between them. She knew they were on the precipice, but the thought of losing this farm, Tom's heritage, their home, the very essence of their shared life, was a nightmare she couldn't fathom. The crisp, official envelope arriving by registered mail was a harbinger of their doom. Its cold, legalistic language delivered the devastating verdict. The bank was initiating foreclosure proceedings. Their fragile dam of hope, painstakingly constructed from frugal living and whispered prayers, finally shattered. A meeting was hastily arranged with Mr. Davies, the local bank manager. Tom had known Davies since they were boys, though their paths had diverged significantly. They clung to a sliver of hope that Davies, a man from their own community, might understand their plight, might find some compassion, offer some lifeline, an extension, a different payment plan, anything. The bank's interior was all polished surfaces and hushed, sterile air, a stark, cold contrast to the warm, earthy embrace of their farm. Mr. Davies, looking harried and older than his years, avoided their pleading gaze as he rustled through a thick file. He wasn't a monster. Sarah sensed a weariness in him, perhaps even a touch of discomfort, but he was, above all, an instrument of the institution he served. "Tom, Sarah," he began, his voice devoid of warmth, "I've gone over your accounts. The situation is not good. The bank has been very patient. You must understand." He methodically recited the missed payments, the ballooning interest, the previous unsuccessful attempts to renegotiate. Each word was a precise, painful incision. Tom tried to interject, his voice hoarse as he spoke of the unrelenting drought, the collapsed market prices for their meager yield, his promises to work even harder, to find a way. But Mr. Davies held up a hand, a gesture of finality. "I'm afraid it's out of my personal control now, Tom. The decision has come from regional headquarters. The FAR will be put up for auction in 30 days. 30 days. The words hung in the air, an impossibly short countdown to the end of their world. Sarah, usually so articulate in a crisis, felt a cold dread paralyze her. She searched Mr. Davies' face for any sign of give, any flicker of empathy, but saw only the resigned mask of a man delivering a verdict he had delivered many times before. He pushed a pamphlet across the gleaming desk. "There are some support services for families facing displacement," he offered, the words feeling like a final, bitter twist of the knife. They stumbled out of the bank into the bright, uncaring afternoon sun, the vibrant life of Main Street, a cruel mockery of the devastation that had just been wrought upon them. The brutal foreclosure auction sign, hammered into their lawn a week later by an impassive contractor, was the public declaration of their failure. The date stared back at them, mocking their helplessness. Their world had an expiration date, and it was drawing terrifyingly near. In the agonizing days that followed, an oppressive silence descended upon Willow Creek Farm, broken only by the mournful sigh of the wind through the dry corn stalks and the occasional, muffled sob from Tom when he thought Sarah was out of earshot. He moved through their home like a specter, his broad shoulders perpetually slumped, the vibrant light in his blue eyes extinguished. He began to wander the fields, his callous fingers sifting through the dry, unresponsive dust, the land he loved transformed into a symbol of his deepest failure. He started to gather small, precious mementos, his grandfather's intricately carved whittling knife, a faded photograph of his parents on their wedding day, beaming with youthful hope, a crayon drawing he'd made as a small boy, depicting the farm in impossibly bright colors, now yellowed and brittle with age. He placed these treasures carefully into an old wooden chest, each object a fresh stab of grief. He couldn't bring himself to pack the larger items, the furniture, the tools of his trade. The act felt too final, an admission of defeat his spirit wasn't yet ready to make, even as defeat itself was hammering at their door. Sarah watched him, her heart constricted with a love so fierce it felt like a physical ache. She offered words of comfort, but they sounded hollow even to her own ears, utterly inadequate against the sheer magnitude of his despair. Yet, beneath her own profound sorrow, a tiny, stubborn ember of defiance began to glow. She would not let this be their final chapter, not without exhausting every conceivable option. Her mind, racing through possibilities, latched onto a name, a face from a past that felt like another lifetime. Eleanor Vance, her college roommate. Eleanor had been a whirlwind of brilliance, ambition, and surprising vulnerability. Sarah remembered a particularly bleak semester during their sophomore year, when Eleanor, facing family neglect and the threat of losing her scholarship, had teetered on the brink of giving up. Sarah, with her own limited student budget, had shared her meals, spent countless hours tutoring her in difficult subjects, and, perhaps most importantly, had simply listened without judgment as Eleanor poured out her fears and frustrations. They had drifted apart after graduation. As often happens, their lives taking them down vastly different roads. A stray alumni newsletter, glanced at years ago and almost forgotten, had mentioned Eleanor's rise to become a formidable attorney in a prestigious law firm on the East Coast. It was the longest of long shots. What could a high-powered corporate lawyer possibly do to save a failing farm in Iowa? And why would she even consider it after so many years of silence? Yet the alternative, to stand by and watch Tom and everything he held dear wither away, was simply unbearable. With trembling fingers and a prayer caught in her throat, Sarah unearthed an old, battered address book. Eleanor's parents' last known address was scribbled inside. A few discreet, hopeful calls to the Alumni Association, a polite but persistent navigation of automated phone systems, and finally, miraculously, she had a direct line to Eleanor Vance, attorney at law. Standing behind the relative privacy of the old barn, the cold metal of her aging cell phone pressed hard against her ear. Sarah dialed the number. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. Each ring echoed in the vast emptiness of her fear. She nearly hung up, a wave of humiliation washing over her at the thought of this desperate, perhaps foolish, plea. Eleanor Vance. A voice answered, crisp, professional, and utterly unfamiliar. Sarah's own voice was barely a shaky whisper. Eleanor? It's Sarah. Sarah Jenkins. We were roommates in college. My name was Sarah Albright back then. A beat of silence stretched across the line. So profound Sarah was certain the connection had dropped. Then, Sarah? Good heavens! Sarah Albright, is that really you? After all these years. The surprise in Eleanor's voice was unmistakable, and beneath it, a note of warmth that sent a tiny shiver of relief through Sarah. Tears pricked at Sarah's eyes, blurring the dusty scene before her. Yes, Eleanor, it's me. Then, before her courage could desert her, Sarah poured out their story. The farm, the generations of history, the devastating drought, the predatory bank, the looming auction. She didn't embellish. She didn't plead for pity. She simply laid bare the stark, brutal truth of the predicament, her voice trembling but steady. She spoke of Tom's crushing despair, of the legacy they were about to lose, of the deep, abiding love they held for their home. She also, hesitantly, reminded Eleanor that difficult sophomore year of the small kindnesses Sarah had offered, not as a claim, but as a shared memory. When she finally fell silent, another pause stretched between them, this one heavy, charged with unspoken emotions. Sarah held her breath, her entire future seeming to hang on Eleanor's response. Sarah, Eleanor said at last, her voice softer now, imbued with an emotion Sarah couldn't quite decipher. I'm speechless. That's just awful. Truly awful. There was no immediate promise of solution, no grand declaration. But critically, there was no dismissal either. Listen to me, Sarah. Send me everything. Every piece of paper you have from the bank, the loan agreements, the foreclosure notice, any correspondence. Scan it and email it to me immediately. Can you do that? Yes, Sarah breathed, a tiny, fragile seed of hope daring to sprout in the desolate landscape of her heart. Yes, I can do that right now. I can't make any promises. Sarah, you understand that, don't you? This is a complicated legal matter, and I'm 1,000 miles away. I understand, Sarah whispered, though a desperate part of her yearned for certainty. Thank you, Eleanor. Thank you for listening. It means more than you can possibly imagine. Sarah, Eleanor said, her voice suddenly very clear and very firm. You were there for me when I had no one. You shared what little you had. You helped me see a future when I couldn't see one for myself. Let me see what I can do. Just let me see. The call ended. Sarah leaned heavily against the rough, sun-warmed wood of the barn, her legs threatening to buckle. She had done it. She had cast her desperate prayer into the wind. Now, all they could do was endure the agonizing wait and pray that her mysterious call had, indeed, reached an angel. The days that followed were a unique form of torture, a tightrope walk between fragile hope and crushing despair. The auction loomed, now less than 2 weeks away, its shadow stretching longer with each passing sunset. Tom, completely unaware of Sarah's desperate, secret communication, continued his mournful inventory of their life, his movements slow and heavy, his eyes reflecting a profound, hollow grief. He'd started clearing out old tools from the barn, his callous hands lingering on the smooth, worn handles of implements wielded by his father and his grandfather before him. Each familiar touch was a fresh torment. He spoke little, and when he did, his voice was flat, devoid of its usual resonant warmth. Sarah observed him, her heart atight, painful not of fear and that tenuous, flickering hope. She had meticulously scanned and emailed every single document Eleanor had requested, her hands shaking so violently she'd had to reduce several pages. She found herself checking her email incessantly, her old cell phone clutched in her hand like a sacred relic. Eleanor had called back once. A brief, intensely focused conversation. She'd fired off a series of pointed questions regarding specific clauses in the original loan agreements, the interest rate adjustments, and the bank's communication protocols. Her tone was strictly professional, offering no hint of her ultimate intentions or the likelihood of success. Yet Sarah clung to the very fact that she had called back at all. It signified that Eleanor was actively engaged, that she hadn't dismissed their plight as a lost cause. But the silence that ensued after that second call was almost unbearable, amplifying Sarah's anxiety with each passing hour. She tried to maintain a semblance of normalcy for Tom's sake. She prepared his favorite meals, though he often just pushed the food around his plate. She chattered about trivial local news, the weather forecast, a neighbor's new litter of puppies, anything to fill the oppressive, heavy silence that had enveloped their home. Her forced cheerfulness felt brittle, like a thin pane of glass on the verge of shattering. One sweltering afternoon, Martha Henderson, their kind elderly neighbor from the adjacent farm, no relation, thankfully, to the infamous banker, trudged up their dusty driveway. She was a woman whose face was a testament to a life of hard work and prairie winds, etched with lines of worry that currently mirrored Sarah's own. She carried a covered casserole dish, its aroma faintly piercing the stagnant air. "Just thought you two might appreciate some company," she said, her voice a soft, comforting balm. "And a bit of my chicken and biscuit bake. It always seems to make the world feel a little kinder, even if just for an hour or two." Sarah's eyes instantly welled with tears. The simple, unasked-for kindness, the genuine warmth in Martha's gaze, was almost too much to bear in her overwrought state. "Oh, Martha," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion, "that is just so incredibly thoughtful of you." Martha Henderson, with the innate wisdom of age and experience, didn't pry into her troubles, nor did she offer empty platitudes. She simply sat with Sarah at the worn, scarred kitchen table, sipping lukewarm iced tea, and talked about her prize-winning roses and the upcoming church picnic. Her presence was a quiet solace, a small, precious island of normalcy in their roiling sea of turmoil. But even Martha's gentle kindness couldn't dispel the ominous, ever-approaching shadow of the auction. As she prepared to leave, she took Sarah's hand, her grip surprisingly firm. "You're a strong woman, Sarah girl. Stronger than you even realize." The words, intended as encouragement, inadvertently amplified the immense weight of Sarah's secret, the fragile, terrifying hope she was nursing entirely alone. What if it all came to nothing? What if Eleanor, for all her brilliance, couldn't help, or ultimately decided the effort was too great? The thought was a cold, cruel fist clenching around her heart. The small, close-knit community of Willow Creek was, of course, aware of their dire situation. Sympathetic murmurs followed them at the general store. Well-intentioned offers of assistance were made, but these, while deeply touching, were ultimately insufficient to avert the impending disaster. One neighbor offered to help them pack, and move. Another, a young couple with a growing family, offered them a spare room in their already crowded little house. These gestures of kindness, while a testament to the goodness of their neighbors, only served to underscore the grim finality of their circumstances. No one in their modest community possessed the kind of financial resources required to save an entire farm from foreclosure. Tom, mired in profound despair, barely registered these offers, perceiving them through a haze of shame as expressions of pity. His pride, already battered and bruised, couldn't endure it. He began to actively avoid people, taking long, solitary walks along the dry, dusty creek bed, the powdery earth rising in mournful puffs around his worn work boots. Sarah felt utterly, terrifyingly alone, trapped between Tom's debilitating grief and her own secret, agonizing hope. The days bled into one another. Each sunrise a slow, inexorable tick closer to the auction. The stark white foreclosure sign on their lawn seemed to grow larger, its bold black letters more menacing with each passing hour. It was the day before the auction. The air inside the farmhouse was thick and heavy with a despair so palpable it felt difficult to draw a full breath. Tom had sequestered himself in the dusty attic for most of the morning, sifting through boxes filled with his parents' and grandparents' belongings, his face a mask of quiet, inconsolable anguish. Sarah had attempted to busy herself with packing a few essential items, but her hands fumbled, her mind a whirlwind of anxiety and prayer. Every creak of the old house, every sigh of the wind against the window panes, sounded like a final, mournful goodbye. Lunch was a somber, silent ritual, the food tasting like ash in their mouths. They were sitting on the weathered porch swing, its rhythmic creak a mournful counterpoint to their thoughts, when the unfamiliar sound of a car engine cut through the afternoon stillness. It wasn't the familiar rumble of a neighbor's pickup truck, nor the smooth, ominous purr of the bank manager's sedan. This was different, smoother, more powerful. A sleek, dark blue sedan, gleaming with an understated elegance that seemed utterly incongruous in their dusty, unkempt farmyard, crunched to a stop. Tom visibly tensed, his eyes narrowing with suspicion. "Now, who in the blazes is that?" he muttered, weariness and fresh apprehension lacing his tone. Probably another officious lawyer bearing more bad news, he thought, or perhaps a prospective buyer wanting a premature look at the property before the vultures descended at the auction. Sarah's heart gave a violent lurch, then seemed to stop altogether. She recognized that type of car. It was precisely the kind of vehicle she imagined Eleanor Vance would drive. Could it possibly be? After all this agonizing silence, the driver's door opened and a woman emerged. She was tall, impeccably dressed in a sharply tailored pantsuit of a deep charcoal gray, her auburn hair styled in a chic, professional cut. She exuded an aura of confidence and authority, looking as though she had stepped directly out of a high-powered boardroom rather than onto the neglected grounds of a failing Iowa farm. She took a moment to survey the scene, the dilapidated farmhouse, the stark, cruel foreclosure sign, and Tom and Sarah, frozen figures on the porch, her expression, for a fleeting second, unreadable. Then her gaze found Sarah's, and a slow, almost hesitant smile began to spread across her face, a smile that seemed to melt away years of corporate armor, revealing the warm, intelligent young woman Sarah remembered from their shared youth. "Sarah," she called out, her voice clear and resonant, carrying easily across the still yard. Sarah rose unsteadily to her feet, her legs trembling beneath her. "Eleanor," she breathed, the name a whispered question, hardly daring to believe her eyes. Tom looked from this polished stranger to his wife, utter confusion momentarily overriding the grief that had been his constant companion. "Sarah, you know this lady?" Eleanor Vance walked towards him with a confident stride, extending a perfectly manicured hand first to Sarah, then to Tom. "Eleanor Vance," she introduced herself, her handshake firm, her gaze direct and surprisingly kind. "It's a genuine pleasure to finally meet you in person, Tom. Sarah's told me a great deal about you and about this truly beautiful farm." Tom, still thoroughly bewildered but instinctively polite, managed a gruff, "Ma'am." Sarah's mind was a maelstrom of emotions. Eleanor was here, physically here. After all this time, all this silence, what could it possibly mean? Eleanor turned back to Sarah, her eyes, a striking shade of hazel, softening with genuine affection. I am so profoundly sorry I couldn't call you sooner, Sarah. Things were exceptionally complicated, and I refused to give you any shred of false hope until I was absolutely certain. She paused, her gaze encompassing the worn, anxious faces before her. The truth is, Sarah, I never, ever forgot what you did for me all those years ago in college. You were a lifeline for me when I was drowning in despair. You shared your meager meals with me when you barely had enough for yourself. You sat with me for hours, helping me study when I was failing, and you believed in me when absolutely no one else on this earth did, not even myself. Tears, hot and sudden, welled in Sarah's eyes. She remembered that dreadful semester vividly now. Eleanor, gaunt and pale, overwhelmed by crushing family problems and the relentless pressure of her demanding academic program. Sarah had simply done what felt natural, what felt right, offering friendship, practical support, and unwavering belief in Eleanor's potential. She had never, for a single moment, imagined that those small acts of kindness would be remembered with such intensity across so many years and such great distance. When I received your email, when I read through those documents, Eleanor continued, her gaze sweeping over the farm, taking in its faded grandeur and evident neglect. I was incensed. The terms of your more recent loans, the bank's utter inflexibility in the face of genuine hardship, it bordered on predatory. And knowing, from your heartfelt words, what this place truly means to you, to your family's history, to Tom's very identity, she took a deep, steadying breath. So, I made a few rather insistent calls. I pulled a few strings. My firm, as it happens, has a department that specializes in complex financial litigation and agricultural law. We have some exceptionally talented people who understand these situations. Tom was staring, first at Eleanor, then at Sarah, then back again, a slow, dawning comprehension beginning to illuminate his grief-stricken features. What exactly are you saying, Miss Vance?" he asked, his voice raspy, barely a whisper. Eleanor Vance smiled, a genuine, radiant smile that transformed her face. "I'm saying, Tom, Sarah, that Willow Creek farm is not going to auction tomorrow." Sarah gasped, her hand flying to her mouth, a sob of disbelief escaping her. Tom simply stared, his jaw slack, utterly speechless. "My legal team uncovered several significant irregularities and, frankly, some unethical practices in the bank's handling of your revised loan agreements over the past few years," Eleanor explained, her voice calm and professional, yet deeply reassuring. "Enough to mount a formidable legal challenge to the foreclosure proceedings. But more importantly than that," she paused, then looked directly at Sarah, her eyes shining. "I've also presented a rather compelling counterproposal to the bank's regional headquarters, one that involves a complete restructuring of your existing debt under fair, equitable, and, most importantly, manageable terms, facilitated by a new, more understanding lender." A new lender? Tom finally managed to choke out, the words thick with disbelief. Eleanor's smile widened. "Indeed, a private agricultural investment group that I happen to have a strong working relationship with, one that believes firmly in the principles of sustainable farming and in providing hard-working, honest people with a genuine second chance." She then added, her voice softening with profound warmth, "And it's a group that also happens to understand and deeply value the concept of repaying an old, significant kindness." The stark, cruel foreclosure auction sign still stood defiantly on their lawn. But suddenly, it seemed to have lost all its malevolent power. The miracle Sarah had prayed for hadn't arrived in a flash of divine light or a sudden windfall of cash. It had arrived in the form of human expertise, powerful connections, and a fierce, unwavering determination, all fueled by a long-remembered act of selfless kindness. It was a result of Sarah's quiet, desperate call from behind the barn, now amplified and answered by the loyalty, resources, and profound gratitude of friends she had once long ago unknowingly saved. The world seemed to spin, then steady itself on a new, more hopeful axis. Tom sank heavily back onto the worn cushions of the porch swing, not in defeat, but in sheer, overwhelming, disbelieving relief. His weathered face, so recently a mask of unrelenting anguish, began to soften, to crumple. A profound tremor ran through his large, work-hardened frame. He looked at Sarah, his eyes, bright once more, filled with emotion so deep, so vast, it needed no words, a potent cocktail of astonished gratitude, boundless love, and a dawning, profound respect for quiet, indomitable strength his wife possessed. Sarah rushed to his side, tears of her own now streaming freely down her cheeks. Tears not of sorrow, but of an explosive, uncontainable joy and profound relief. She knelt before him on the dusty porch boards, taking his calloused, trembling hands in hers. They were no longer the hands of a beaten, defeated man, but the hands of a farmer who had just been given back his life, his heritage, his very soul. Eleanor watched them for a long moment, a gentle, understanding smile gracing her lips. Then she stepped forward. "There are, of course, still details to be finalized," she said, her tone practical yet infused with kindness. "Paperwork to be signed, agreements to be reviewed. But the immediate, critical threat is entirely gone. The auction for tomorrow is officially canceled. Mr. Davies, at your local bank branch, has been thoroughly informed. I believe," she added, a ghost of a wry smile playing on her lips, "he was rather taken aback. He might even be somewhat relieved to pass this particular, challenging file on to someone else, someone with a more creative approach to finance." Tom finally found his voice, though it was hoarse and thick with unshed tears. I don't rightly know how we can ever thank you, Miss Vance." He looked at Sarah, his gaze full of wonder, then back at Eleanor. "What Sarah did for you all those years ago, it must have been something truly extraordinary for you to do all of this for us." Eleanor's expression softened further as she met Sarah's tear-filled eyes. It was Tom. It truly, truly was. When you feel utterly and completely alone in the world, when you believe you have no one to turn to, and one single person steps forward and shows you genuine, selfless, unconditional kindness, you don't ever forget that. Not ever. Sarah didn't just help me pass a few difficult exams or share her lunch money. She helped me believe that I was worth something, that I had a future. That's a debt you can't ever truly repay with mere money, but I can certainly try my best to pay it forward in any way I can. Sarah, her voice choked with emotion, finally managed to speak. "Eleanor, I never, ever expected this. I just hoped, prayed, you might have some advice, some small suggestion." "Well," Eleanor said, a distinct twinkle now in her intelligent eyes, "my first piece of advice is to get that hideous, depressing sign off your beautiful lawn. I believe my associate, Michael, who drove me out here from the city, is quite adept with a hammer for removal purposes, as well as for more constructive endeavors." She gestured towards her car, where a pleasant-looking young man was now emerging, carrying a smart leather briefcase, but also looking surprisingly capable of manual labor. The painful, searing image of the smug banker driving away, of the cruel sign being hammered into their violated earth, was suddenly, blessedly, replaced by a new, indelible one, a friend, an angel in a tailored pantsuit, appearing as if from a long-forgotten dream, offering not just a financial rescue, but a profound restoration of dignity and hope. The immense, crushing weight that had been pressing down on Tom for so many agonizing months began to lift, to dissipate, replaced by a burgeoning sense of disbelief and an overwhelming, heart-swelling gratitude. He looked out at his farm, the late afternoon sun casting long, benevolent shadows across the parched fields, and for the very first time in what felt like an eternity, he saw not just hardship and failure, but burgeoning possibility. He saw a future. Sarah, leaning her head against his strong shoulder, felt his body, usually so rigid with tension, begin to relax, to soften. The silence that settled between them now was no longer one of shared despair, a shared wonder of a miracle they were still struggling to fully comprehend. The quiet, mysterious call, made in desperation from behind the shelter of the old barn, had indeed unleashed more than just a solution. It had reaffirmed the profound, enduring, and often unseen power of human connection and remembered kindness. In the weeks and months that followed, Willow Creek Farm slowly, steadily, began to breathe again, mirroring the renewed hope that had taken root in Tom and Sarah's hearts. Eleanor, true to her word and her generous spirit, guided them meticulously through the complex, often bewildering process of restructuring their finances. Her dedicated legal team worked with diligence and expertise, ensuring that the terms of the new loan were not only fair and equitable, but also genuinely sustainable for the long term. It wasn't an instant magical fix. There was still an immense amount of hard work ahead, difficult decisions to be made, and challenges to overcome. But now, critically, it was work imbued with purpose and optimism, not with the soul-crushing weight of despair. Eleanor herself visited again, not as a high-powered, intimidating lawyer, but as an old, cherished friend. She walked the recovering fields with Tom, listening with genuine interest as he spoke animatedly of his plans for new crop rotations, for innovative water conservation techniques she had researched and suggested, his voice regaining its familiar, enthusiastic timbre. She sat for hours in Sarah's warm, welcoming kitchen, sipping coffee, and they talked endlessly, bridging the gap of intervening years, their shared history forging a new, stronger, and deeply resonant bond. Sarah learned more about Eleanor's own journey after college, her struggles and triumphs as she climbed the demanding corporate ladder, and how the quiet, steadfast memory of Sarah's youthful kindness had often served as an unexpected source of strength and inspiration during her own challenging times. The foreclosure auction sign, that stark symbol of their near ruin, was indeed removed. It wasn't taken down with the grim finality of its installation, but with a quiet, profound sense of triumph. Tom himself, with Sarah and Eleanor watching, pulled it from the unyielding earth. The weather was splintering in his strong, determined grip. He tossed it onto a waiting burn pile, and as they watched the smoke curl lazily upwards toward the vast blue sky, it felt as though they were cleansing not just their land, but their very spirits. News of the farm's miraculous salvation spread like wildfire through the small, tightly knit community, bringing with a collective wave of palpable relief and quiet, heartfelt celebration. Neighbors who had previously offered only hushed sympathy now came forward with practical offers of help, a few hours mending fences, sharing precious advice on drought-resistant seed varieties, lending a much-needed piece of equipment. Their gestures reinforcing the comforting sense that Tom and Sarah were, and had always been, an integral part of a caring community. Even Mr. Davies, the local bank manager, sent a cautiously worded, almost sheepish note, expressing his personal satisfaction at the positive outcome, a subtle, perhaps grudging, acknowledgement of a force far greater and more meaningful than mere balance sheets and profit margins. Tom and Sarah, their partnership forged anew in the crucible of their shared ordeal, and now strengthened by this unexpected deliverance, threw themselves into a formidable task of revitalizing their beloved farm. With Eleanor's ongoing guidance and access to new resources, they began to explore innovative farming methods, diversifying their crops and seeking out niche markets for their future produce. Sarah, discovering a surprising aptitude for organization and a keen eye for marketing, took on the management of the business side of the farm with a newfound confidence and enthusiasm. The deep lines of worry that had been etched so cruelly on Tom's face gradually softened, slowly being replaced by the familiar, welcome crinkles of laughter around his bright, hopeful eyes. Willow Creek Farm began to heal, the tired earth slowly but surely responding to their renewed dedication, care, and optimistic attention. And as they worked side by side, from sunup to sundown, they often spoke of Eleanor and of the incredible, almost unbelievable way a single, selfless act of kindness, often without any thought of reward or recognition decades earlier, had rippled to the current of time to rescue them from the brink of utter devastation. They knew, with a certainty that settled deep in their bones, that they could never fully repay the magnitude of Eleanor's generosity, but they found their own meaningful ways to pay her kindness forward. They began to share their experiences, offering support, advice, and a listening ear to other struggling farmers in their region, their own remarkable story becoming a quiet, inspiring beacon of hope in challenging times. The seasons turned, bringing with them the familiar cycles of planting and harvest, and life on Willow Creek Farm found a new, more resilient and joyful rhythm. The hardship had undoubtedly left its indelible scars, but it also revealed an incredible, often hidden strength, not just within themselves, but in the profound, enduring power of human connection, compassion, and remembered grace. They learned, through their trial by fire, that sometimes the greatest, most life-altering miracles don't arrive with a deafening thunderclap or a blinding flash of light, but in the quiet, unexpected whisper of a long-remembered kindness, a mysterious, desperate call made from the shadows, answered by a heart that had never, ever forgotten. And in that profound, humbling knowledge, Tom and Sarah found a deep and lasting peace, a warmth that settled into their souls, as rich, as nourishing, and as life-giving as the newly fertile, forgiving soil beneath their feet. Their story, passed along in hushed, appreciative tones throughout their small community and beyond, served as a gentle, powerful reminder that even in the deepest, most impenetrable darkness, a single, courageous act of compassion, a reach across the void, can indeed unleash a miracle, forever changing the course of lives.